Marcus Thompson had always been different from other men in his small Montana town. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with an athletic build, he should have been the most sought-after bachelor in Millbrook Valley. Instead, he lived alone on his family's old ranch, avoiding social gatherings and keeping to himself. What the townspeople didn't know was that Marcus harbored a secret that would have sent them running for the hills if they ever discovered it. He wasn't entirely human. For 28 years, Marcus had successfully hidden his true nature from everyone around him. His father had been an extraterrestrial being who had crash-landed on Earth during a fierce storm in 1995. His mother, Sarah Thompson, had found the injured alien in their barn and nursed him back to health. What started as an act of compassion had blossomed into an impossible love story that resulted in Marcus's birth. The alien visitor had possessed an unusual ability to shift between his natural form and that of a magnificent stallion. It was a trait that Marcus had inherited, though he had spent his entire life suppressing it. The transformation was triggered by intense emotions, particularly stress or fear, and Marcus had learned to control his feelings with military precision to avoid any unwanted changes. His alien heritage manifested in other ways, too. Marcus possessed superhuman strength, enhanced senses, and an almost telepathic connection with horses. The local veterinarians often called him when they encountered difficult cases, amazed by his ability to calm even the most aggressive animals. He had an uncanny understanding of their needs and could communicate with them in ways that seemed almost magical to observers. Despite his extraordinary abilities, Marcus lived in constant fear of discovery. He had seen too many science fiction movies to believe that humanity would accept him if they knew the truth. The thought of being captured, studied, or worse, kept him awake at night. He had built walls around himself, both literal and metaphorical, to keep his secrets safe. The literal walls were the high fences surrounding his property, topped with security cameras and motion sensors. He had installed them under the pretense of protecting his valuable livestock, but in reality, they were meant to keep prying eyes away from any potential transformations. The metaphorical walls were even stronger. He avoided close relationships, declined dinner invitations, and politely turned down every woman who had ever shown interest in him. That carefully constructed isolation came to an abrupt end on a rainy Tuesday morning in October when Elena Rodriguez arrived at his ranch. Elena was a newly graduated veterinary student who had been hired by the county to conduct a health assessment of all local livestock operations. She was petite, standing barely 5 feet tall, with long dark hair that she usually kept in a practical ponytail. Her brown eyes held an intelligence and determination that had helped her graduate at the top of her class despite coming from a poor family that couldn't afford to support her education. She had worked 3 jobs throughout college, surviving on instant noodles and sheer willpower to achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Now, at 26, she was finally ready to start her career, though she was nervous about this particular assignment. The Thompson Ranch had a reputation for being difficult to access, and its owner was known to be somewhat antisocial. When Elena's small pickup truck pulled up to Marcus's front gate, he was watching from his kitchen window, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He had received the county's notice about the inspection weeks ago and had been dreading this moment ever since. Having a trained veterinarian examining his animals meant there was a risk she might notice something unusual about his interaction with them. Marcus walked slowly to the gate, his heart pounding in a way that made him worry about triggering an unwanted transformation. He forced himself to take deep, calming breaths as he approached the small woman who was already pulling equipment from her truck. "Mr. Thompson," Elena called out, extending her hand with a professional smile. "I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the county veterinary office. Thank you for accommodating this inspection on such short notice." Marcus hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand, careful to control his strength. Even that brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through his system, and he quickly pulled away, hoping she hadn't noticed his reaction. "Just Marcus is fine," he replied, his voice gruffer than he had intended. "Let's get this over with quickly. I have work to do." Elena's smile faltered slightly at his brusque tone, but she maintained her professionalism. She had dealt with difficult farmers before and knew that many of them viewed inspections as unnecessary government interference. She was determined to complete her job thoroughly while being as minimally invasive as possible. "I understand your time is valuable," she said, hefting her medical bag. "If you could just show me to your animals, I'll work as efficiently as possible. This should only take a couple of hours." Marcus led her toward the main barn, his entire body tense with anxiety. The building housed 12 horses, 3 cows, and a small flock of sheep that he raised more for cover than profit. As they approached the entrance, he could hear the animals beginning to stir, sensing his presence. What happened next would have amazed any normal observer, but it terrified Marcus. The moment Elena stepped into the barn, every single animal fell silent and turned to look at her. The horses, who were typically skittish around strangers, approached their stall doors with calm curiosity. The cows, who usually ignored visitors completely, walked to the front of their enclosure. Even the sheep, who normally scattered at the first sign of a newcomer, gathered together and watched her with peaceful attention. Elena noticed the unusual behavior immediately, but she interpreted it differently than Marcus feared she would. In her experience, animals that reacted this way were responding to someone who possessed a natural gift for working with them. It was a rare quality that she had only encountered a few times during her training, and it immediately raised her opinion of the taciturn rancher. "They certainly seem comfortable with you," she commented, pulling on latex gloves and approaching the first horse. "Have you had formal training in animal behavior?" Marcus shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. He watched nervously as Elena began her examination, noting how gentle and thorough she was with each animal. Despite his anxiety about the situation, he found himself impressed by her skill and obvious love for her work. The first few examinations went smoothly. Elena worked with quiet efficiency, taking notes and occasionally murmuring soft words of encouragement to the animals. Marcus began to relax slightly, thinking that perhaps this wouldn't be as difficult as he had feared. Then, Elena reached Thunder, Marcus's prize stallion, and the horse that most closely resembled his own transformed state. Thunder was a magnificent black Arabian with an almost supernatural intelligence. Marcus had rescued him as a colt from an abusive situation, and the two had formed an immediate bond. The horse seemed to understand Marcus in ways that went beyond normal animal-human communication, and Marcus suspected that Thunder somehow sensed his alien heritage. As Elena approached Thunder's stall, the stallion did something he had never done with a stranger before. He nickered softly and lowered his head in a gesture of submission and welcome. Elena paused, clearly surprised by the gesture. "That's unusual," she murmured, reaching out to stroke Thunder's neck. "He's beautiful, Marcus. What's his bloodline?" Marcus's mouth went dry. He hadn't prepared a proper answer for that question because Thunder's bloodline was as mysterious as his own. He had forged papers for the horse years ago, but he couldn't remember the details under pressure. "Mixed breeding," he said finally, hoping the vague answer would suffice. Elena nodded, but Marcus could see the curiosity in her eyes as she began her examination. Thunder stood perfectly still, allowing her to check his teeth, listen to his heart, and examine his hooves without the slightest resistance. Most stallions required some form of restraint during veterinary procedures, but Thunder acted as though he was enjoying the attention. As Elena worked, she began to notice other unusual things about the ranch. The animals were all in exceptional health, with glossy coats and bright eyes that spoke of excellent care. Their living conditions were immaculate, far beyond what was required by county standards. Most surprisingly, there wasn't a single sign of the stress-related behaviors that were common in livestock operations. No cribbing, weaving, or other repetitive actions that indicated boredom or anxiety. "You run an exceptional operation here," Elena said as she finished with Thunder and moved to the next stall. "I've never seen animals this well cared for. Do you have a special feeding program or exercise routine?" Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead, despite the cool autumn air. Every compliment Elena gave him felt like another step closer to exposure. He couldn't explain that his care was so exceptional because he could literally sense what each animal needed, or that his feeding program was based on instincts he had inherited from his alien father. Just experience, he muttered, wishing desperately that she would finish her work and leave. But Elena was thorough in her examinations, and as the morning progressed, she became more and more intrigued by what she was seeing. It wasn't just the excellent condition of the animals. There was something almost magical about the way they responded to Marcus. She had seen good animal handlers before, but this was something beyond normal skill. The final stall contained a mare named Luna, who had been rescued from the same situation as Thunder. Luna was notoriously difficult with strangers, often requiring sedation for veterinary procedures. Marcus had warned Elena about the mare's temperament, expecting her to request tranquilizers before attempting an examination. Instead, Elena approached the stall slowly, speaking in a soft, melodic voice that Marcus had never heard her use before. To his amazement, Luna approached the stall door willingly, allowing Elena to stroke her muzzle and examine her without any signs of stress or aggression. As Elena worked with Luna, something unexpected happened. The mare began to make soft, rhythmic sounds that Marcus recognized as a form of communication he had never heard her use with humans before. It was the same type of vocalization that horses in his alien father's species used to express contentment and trust. Marcus's heart began to race, and he felt the familiar tingling sensation that preceded a transformation. Panic flooded through him as he realized he was losing control of his carefully maintained facade. He needed to get away from Elena immediately before she witnessed something that would change everything. "I need to check on something in the house," he said abruptly, turning to leave the barn. "Wait," Elena called after him, her voice filled with concern. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." Marcus paused at the barn entrance, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly that the wood creaked under the pressure. He could feel his body beginning to change, his muscles shifting and lengthening in ways that would soon become impossible to hide. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Just finish up and let yourself out when you're done." He practically ran to the house, barely making it inside before the transformation began in earnest. His carefully controlled human facade crumbled as his body shifted into its natural form. Within moments, where Marcus Thompson had stood, there was now a magnificent stallion with a coat that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality. In the barn, Elena had stopped working and was staring thoughtfully at the empty doorway. Something about Marcus's behavior had triggered her veterinary training. She had seen similar symptoms before in animals that were experiencing extreme stress or illness. Her professional instincts told her that something was seriously wrong, and despite his clear desire for solitude, she couldn't simply ignore what might be a medical emergency. After quickly finishing her examination of Luna, Elena packed her equipment and walked toward the house. She could see lights on in what appeared to be the kitchen, but when she knocked on the front door, there was no answer. Growing more concerned, she walked around to the back of the house, looking for any sign of Marcus. What she saw in the backyard stopped her dead in her tracks. Standing in the middle of Marcus's garden was the most beautiful horse she had ever seen. Its coat seemed to glow with an inner light, and its eyes held an intelligence that was almost human in its depth. The horse was looking directly at her, and Elena had the strangest feeling that it was trying to communicate something important. She approached slowly, the way she had been trained to approach unknown animals. But this horse showed no fear or aggression. Instead, it walked toward her, stopping just close enough for her to reach out and touch its neck. The moment Elena's hand made contact with the horse's coat, she felt a jolt of recognition that she couldn't explain. There was something familiar about this magnificent creature, something that reminded her of the way Marcus had looked at her during their brief interaction. As she stood there in the gathering twilight, stroking the mysterious horse's neck and looking into its impossibly intelligent eyes, Elena had no way of knowing that she was about to become part of a story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the world. The horse that stood before her was no ordinary animal. It was Marcus Thompson, trapped in his alien form and terrified that his secret had finally been exposed. But as he looked into Elena's kind, accepting eyes, he began to wonder if perhaps, for the first time in his life, he had found someone who might be able to accept him for what he truly was. In the distance, the first stars were beginning to appear in the Montana sky, and somewhere in the cosmic vastness beyond, forces were stirring that would soon make Marcus's personal struggles seem small in comparison. But for now, in this quiet moment between a gifted veterinarian and an impossible creature, the seeds of a love story that would span worlds were being planted. Elena didn't know that the horse before her was actually the man she had been examining animals with just minutes earlier. She didn't know that she was about to become part of an adventure that would take her far beyond the boundaries of everything she thought was possible. All she knew was that there was something special about this creature, something that called to her in ways she couldn't begin to understand. As the evening deepened around them, neither Elena nor Marcus could have imagined that their meeting was about to set in motion events that would not only reveal the truth about Marcus's heritage, but also uncover a threat that could endanger both Earth and the distant world from which his father had come. The transformation that had terrified Marcus for so long was about to become the key to saving everything he held dear. And Elena, the compassionate veterinarian who had stumbled into his secret world, was about to prove that love could indeed bridge the gap between species, between worlds, and between the known and the impossible. But first, they would have to navigate the complex emotions and fears that came with such an extraordinary revelation. Marcus would have to learn to trust another person with his most closely guarded secret, and Elena would have to expand her understanding of what was possible in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than she had ever imagined. Elena stood in the backyard for what felt like hours, though her watch told her it had been only 20 minutes. The mysterious horse remained calm beside her, occasionally nuzzling her shoulder with a gentleness that seemed almost human in its consideration. She had examined thousands of animals during her training, but never had she encountered one that made her feel so completely at peace. As darkness began to fall across the Montana landscape, Elena reluctantly stepped back from the magnificent creature. She still had no idea where Marcus had gone, and her professional concern for his well-being was growing stronger by the minute. The way he had fled the barn suggested someone in significant distress, and she couldn't simply leave without knowing he was safe. She tried knocking on the front door again, then checked the windows for any sign of movement inside the house. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus was nowhere to be found. His truck was still parked in the driveway, which meant he hadn't left the property. The logical explanation was that he was somewhere on the ranch, perhaps dealing with whatever emergency had caused his hasty departure from the barn. What Elena didn't know was that Marcus was standing less than 10 feet away from her, trapped in his horse form and struggling with the most intense emotional conflict of his life. Every instinct told him to flee into the darkness before Elena could discover his secret. It's something about her presence, her gentle touch, and the way she had handled his animals made him want to stay. The transformation had been triggered by panic, but now that panic was being replaced by something even more dangerous to his carefully controlled existence: hope. For the first time in his 28 years, Marcus found himself in the presence of someone who might possibly accept him for what he truly was. Elena's natural gift with animals, her obvious compassion, and the inexplicable way his livestock had responded to her suggested that she was different from other humans. As Elena continued her search around the property, calling Marcus's name into the growing darkness, the horse followed her at a respectful distance. She was beginning to worry seriously about his safety when she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Lying on the ground near the back porch was Marcus's shirt, discarded as though he had removed it in haste. A few feet away, she found his boots, and beyond that, his jeans. The clothes formed a trail leading from the house toward the area where she had first encountered the mysterious horse. Elena's veterinary training had taught her to look for patterns and to consider explanations that others might miss. She stood there in the moonlight, looking from the discarded clothes to the horse that was now standing quietly beside a large oak tree, watching her with those impossibly intelligent eyes. A wild, impossible thought began to form in her mind. During her studies, Elena had encountered research into various forms of shape-shifting mythology, partly out of academic curiosity and partly because her grandmother had filled her childhood with stories of transformation magic from their Mexican heritage. While she was a woman of science who didn't believe in supernatural phenomena, she had learned that many myths contained kernels of truth that science had simply not yet been able to explain. Looking at the evidence before her, the missing man, the discarded clothes, and the extraordinary horse that had appeared at exactly the moment Marcus disappeared, Elena found herself considering possibilities that would have seemed ridiculous just hours earlier. She approached the horse slowly, her heart pounding with a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing certainty. When she was close enough to look directly into its eyes, she spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "Marcus!" The horse's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Its ears pricked forward, its head lifted with obvious recognition, and it took a step closer to her. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat as the impossible became undeniable. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It really is you, isn't it?" Marcus, trapped in his horse form and overwhelmed by the realization that his secret was discovered, began to experience the emotional turmoil that would normally trigger a transformation back to human form. But something was wrong. The change that usually came so naturally now seemed to be blocked by some invisible barrier. Elena, with her veterinary experience, recognized the signs of distress immediately. The horse's breathing had become rapid and shallow, its muscles were trembling, and its eyes showed the kind of panic she had seen in animals experiencing severe anxiety. "Hey, it's okay," she said softly, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "I don't understand what's happening here, but I can see that you're scared. Just breathe. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." Her touch and soothing voice began to calm Marcus's panic, but the transformation back to human form still eluded him. As minutes passed and nothing changed, Elena began to realize that this might not be a simple matter of waiting for a voluntary shape-shifting to reverse itself. Drawing on her medical training, Elena began to consider what might cause someone to become stuck in an altered form. She had studied enough veterinary neurology to know that extreme stress could sometimes cause neurological disruptions, and if Marcus was indeed some sort of shapeshifter, it was possible that his transformation abilities were being affected by the emotional trauma of discovery. "Can you understand me?" she asked, looking into the horse's eyes. "If you can, nod your head." Marcus nodded clearly, and Elena felt a thrill of scientific excitement despite the bizarre circumstances. She was communicating with an intelligent being in a form that shouldn't be possible according to everything she knew about biology and physics. "Are you stuck like this? Can't change back." Another nod, this one accompanied by what Elena could only interpret as a deeply frustrated snort. "Okay, let me think," Elena said, beginning to pace in small circles around the horse. Her mind was racing through everything she knew about stress responses in animals, neurological conditions, and even the folklore her grandmother had shared about shape-shifting spirits. One thing that stood out in her memory was a story about transformation magic being disrupted by fear and restored by acceptance and trust. While she didn't believe in magic per se, she understood that psychological states could have profound effects on physical conditions. If Marcus's shape-shifting was somehow connected to his emotional state, then his fear of rejection might be preventing the transformation back to human form. "Marcus," she said, moving to stand directly in front of him so they were eye to eye, "I need you to listen to me carefully. I don't pretend to understand what you are or how this is possible, but I want you to know that I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going to hurt you or expose your secret. You're obviously not entirely human, and well, it's incredible, but it doesn't change the fact that you're still you." The horse's ears perked forward attentively, and Elena could see something shifting in its expression. Encouraged, she continued, "I've spent my entire career working with animals, and I can tell the difference between a beast and an intelligent being. You're not dangerous, are you?" You're just someone who's different, someone who's been hiding what they really are because they were afraid of how people would react. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For 28 years, he had lived in fear of this exact moment, convinced that discovery would mean the end of everything he held dear. Yet here was Elena, faced with the impossible truth of his nature, responding with curiosity and acceptance rather than terror or disgust. "I'm a veterinarian," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I've taken oaths to help and protect animals, and if you're some sort of human-animal hybrid or shapeshifter or whatever you are, then those oaths apply to you too. I'm not going to abandon you when you need help." As she spoke these words, Elena realized she meant them completely. Her scientific mind was reeling with questions about how such a transformation could be possible, but her heart was responding to the obvious vulnerability of the creature before her. This wasn't a monster or a threat. This was someone who had been living in isolation and fear, someone who needed understanding rather than judgment. The combination of Elena's acceptance and her genuine desire to help began to work on Marcus like medicine. He felt the familiar tingling sensation that preceded transformation, and this time, the change wasn't blocked by fear and panic. Slowly, carefully, he allowed his human form to reassert itself. Elena watched in amazement as the horse's shape began to blur and shift. It was like watching a time-lapse video in reverse, as limbs shortened and reformed, the muzzle receded, and the magnificent coat faded to reveal human skin. Within moments, Marcus stood before her in his human form, completely naked and trembling with exhaustion. Elena immediately turned away to give him privacy, though not before noticing that his human form bore subtle marks of his alien heritage. His eyes held flecks of the same otherworldly light she had seen in the horse, and his muscle structure was more defined than any normal human could achieve. "Your clothes are over there," she said, pointing toward the scattered garments without looking at him. Marcus dressed quickly, his hands shaking from the aftermath of the prolonged transformation. When he was decent, Elena turned back to face him, and they stood looking at each other in the moonlight, both uncertain what to say next. "So," Elena said finally, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and clinical curiosity. That was definitely not covered in veterinary school. Despite everything, Marcus found himself almost smiling at her matter-of-fact tone. "I imagine not. Are you? Were you born like this? Are there others like you?" Marcus hesitated, weighing how much truth he was ready to share. The fact that Elena had helped him through his transformation crisis suggested she could be trusted, but his father's warnings about human nature still echoed in his mind. "It's complicated," he said finally. "My father wasn't from Earth. He crash-landed here in the 1990s and fell in love with my mother. I guess you could say I'm half alien." Elena absorbed this information with the same calm professionalism she would apply to any unusual medical case. "That would explain the exceptional connection you have with animals. Is the shape-shifting ability something all of your father's species possess?" "Yes, but it's usually controllable. What happened tonight, getting stuck like that, it's never happened before. I think it was because I was so afraid of you finding out. But I did find out, and nothing terrible happened," Elena pointed out. "I'm still here, aren't I?" Marcus looked at her with something approaching awe. "You're not afraid? You're not thinking about calling the authorities or the media?" Elena shook her head firmly. "Patient confidentiality extends to veterinary practice too, you know. Besides, who would believe me? And even if they did, what would be the point? You're not hurting anyone. You're just trying to live your life in peace." For the first time since his father's departure from Earth 15 years earlier, Marcus felt like he might not be completely alone in the universe. Elena's acceptance was like a gift he had never dared hope for, and it filled him with a warmth he barely knew how to process. "There's more," he said impulsively, driven by a sudden need to share everything with this remarkable woman. "My father didn't just leave Earth because he wanted to. He was recalled by his people, and he left warnings about something coming, something that might threaten both worlds." Elena's expression grew more serious. What kind of threat? I don't know exactly. He was always vague about the details. Said it was better if I didn't know too much until it became necessary. But he taught me to watch for signs, and lately, Marcus trailed off, looking up at the star-filled sky. Elena followed his gaze and noticed something she had missed before. Several of the stars seemed to be moving in patterns that didn't match normal satellite or aircraft trajectories. Lately, you've been seeing signs, Elena finished for him. Marcus nodded grimly. The animals have been restless for weeks. Not just mine. I've heard reports from ranchers all across the state about livestock behaving strangely. And there have been unexplained lights in the sky almost every night. As if summoned by their conversation, a brilliant flash of light streaked across the heavens, too slow to be a meteor and too bright to be a conventional aircraft. Elena watched it with growing unease, beginning to understand that her discovery of Marcus's secret might be just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous. Your father's people, are they the ones responsible for those lights? I don't think so, Marcus replied, his voice troubled. My father's species are peaceful explorers. The lights feel different, hostile somehow. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Her scientific training had taught her to be skeptical of extraordinary claims, but the evidence of her own senses was becoming impossible to ignore. First the shape-shifting, now potential alien visitors. Her worldview was expanding rapidly in directions she had never imagined possible. What did your father say you should do if these signs appeared? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of responsibility that Elena could feel in her bones. He said I would know when the time came to stop hiding and start fighting. He said I would find allies among humans who could see beyond the surface of things, people who could accept the impossible and help bridge the gap between worlds. Elena looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the same intelligence and depth she had recognized in his horse form. But now she also saw something else. Hope, mixed with a terrible certainty that their peaceful lives were about to change forever. You think I'm one of these allies, she said. It wasn't a question. I think, Marcus replied slowly, that you arriving here today, just when the signs are growing stronger, might not be a coincidence. I think you being able to accept what I am, being able to help me through what happened tonight. I think maybe the universe brought you here for a reason. Above them, another light moved across the sky, this one closer and brighter than the first. As Elena watched it, she realized that her quiet life as a small-town veterinarian was about to become something far more extraordinary and dangerous than she had ever imagined. But looking at Marcus, seeing the hope and trust in his eyes, she also realized that she wouldn't change anything about this moment. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, standing beside someone who might need her help to save not just one world, but two. The adventure of a lifetime was about to begin, and Elena Rodriguez was ready to face whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's discovery of Marcus's true nature, and their lives had settled into an unusual but comfortable routine. Elena had officially completed her inspection of the Thompson Ranch with glowing reports, but she found herself returning almost daily under various professional pretenses. She told herself it was to monitor the unusual animal behaviors Marcus had mentioned, but deep down, she knew she was drawn back by her growing feelings for the extraordinary man who had trusted her with his deepest secret. During those 3 weeks, Marcus had shared more of his story with Elena than he had ever told another living soul. She learned about his father, Zephyr, who had been an explorer from a world called Equinara in the Andromeda Galaxy. The people of Equinara had evolved from a horse-like species, developing both intelligence and the ability to take on humanoid forms to better interact with other civilizations they encountered during their peaceful explorations. Zephyr had been part of a small research team studying Earth's biodiversity when their ship was damaged in a solar storm. While his teammates managed to repair their vessel and return home, Zephyr had been injured and left behind, presumed dead. His recovery had taken months, during which Sarah Thompson had cared for him in secret, and by the time he was well enough to contact his people, he had fallen deeply in love with both Sarah and the planet Earth. Elena found herself fascinated by these stories, not just as a scientist intrigued by the biological impossibilities Marcus represented, but as a woman falling in love with someone whose very existence challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. Marcus, for his part, was experiencing emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. Elena's acceptance of his alien heritage had freed him from the constant fear that had governed his life, and in that freedom, he had discovered what it meant to love someone completely. Their growing relationship might have continued to develop naturally, if not for the events that began on a cold November morning when Elena arrived at the ranch to find Marcus standing in his backyard, staring at something in his hand with an expression of profound shock. "What is it?" Elena asked, approaching him with growing concern. Marcus held up a small, crystalline device that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "It's a communication crystal," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father left several of them hidden around the property before he departed. They were supposed to activate only if his people tried to contact Earth." Elena looked at the device with scientific curiosity. It was about the size of a smartphone, but appeared to be made of some kind of living crystal that shifted and moved like trapped liquid light. "Has it been activated?" "Just now, while I was feeding the horses." It started glowing and projecting images. Marcus paused, swallowing hard. "Elena, my father's people are coming back to Earth, and they're not coming alone." Before Elena could ask what he meant, the crystal began to glow brighter, and suddenly the air above it shimmered and formed into a three-dimensional holographic image. Elena gasped as she found herself looking at a being that was clearly related to Marcus, but obviously not entirely human. The figure in the hologram was tall and elegant, with the same piercing eyes as Marcus, but skin that held a subtle, iridescent quality. When it spoke, its voice had a musical quality that seemed to resonate directly in their minds rather than through their ears. "Marcus, my son," the figure said, and Elena realized she was looking at Zephyr, Marcus's father. "If you're receiving this message, it means that the threat I warned you about has finally arrived in your solar system. The Devourers have found Earth, and they're already beginning their advance toward your world." Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, and she reached out to take his hand, offering what comfort she could as they listened to the terrifying message. "The Devourers are an ancient race that consumes the life force of entire worlds," Zephyr continued. "They have been pursuing my people across the galaxy for millennia, and we have always managed to stay ahead of them by warning worlds in their path and helping organize defenses. But they have grown stronger, and their hunger has become insatiable." The holographic image shifted, showing a star map with various worlds marked in different colors. Elena could see that many of the markers were black, and she didn't need to ask what that meant. "We are coming to help Earth mount a defense, but we cannot do it alone. The Devourers have learned to adapt to our traditional methods of resistance. This time, we need allies who can think and fight in ways they do not expect. We need the hybrid vigor of those who bridge two worlds." Marcus's hand tightened around Elena's as his father's image looked directly at him. "My son, you are not the only hybrid on Earth. Over the past century, several of my people have chosen to remain on your world and start families with humans. Their children, like you, possess abilities that could be crucial in the coming battle. You must find them and help them understand what they are. Together, you may be able to do what pure equinarians cannot." The image began to flicker, suggesting the message was nearly over. "We will arrive in 72 Earth hours at the coordinates I taught you to remember. Be ready, Marcus. The fate of both our worlds may depend on what happens in the coming days." The hologram faded, leaving Marcus and Elena standing in stunned silence. Elena's mind was racing with questions and implications, but one concern stood out above all others. 72 hours, she said quietly. "That's not very long to find other hybrids and convince them to join a war against alien invaders." Marcus nodded grimly. "And we don't even know where to start looking. My father never told me about the others, probably to protect their anonymity." Elena's veterinary training had taught her to approach complex problems systematically. We need to think about this logically. If these other hybrids inherited similar abilities to yours, they might have left traces we can follow. Your connection with animals is unusual enough that other veterinarians would have noticed it if they encountered something similar. You're right, Marcus said, his expression brightening slightly. And livestock behavior has been strange all across the region lately. If there are other hybrids nearby, the animals would be responding to their presence too. They spent the next several hours developing a plan. Elena used her professional contacts to gather reports of unusual animal behaviors from across Montana and the surrounding states. Marcus used his own network of ranchers and farmers to identify areas where livestock had been displaying the kind of calm intelligence that Elena had noticed in his own animals. By evening, they had identified 3 locations where the animal behavior patterns suggested the possible presence of equine hybrids. The first was a wildlife sanctuary in Wyoming run by a reclusive woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, who had gained a reputation for her almost supernatural ability to rehabilitate injured wild animals. The second was a ranch in North Dakota owned by a man called Jake Morrison, whose horses had won every competition they entered despite having no apparent breeding advantages. The third was a veterinary clinic in Colorado where Dr. Maria Santos had achieved a success rate with difficult cases that bordered on miraculous. 3 potential hybrids across 4 states, Elena said, studying their map. We can't visit them all in person before your father arrives. We don't have to, Marcus replied. If they're really like me, they'll be feeling the same unease I've been experiencing. They'll be looking for answers just like we are. Marcus activated another of his father's communication crystals, this one designed for local broadcasts rather than interstellar messages. Within hours, they received responses from all 3 locations. Dr. Chun, Jake Morrison, and Dr. Santos all reported experiencing strange dreams, unusual animal behaviors, and a growing sense that something momentous was about to happen. Elena marveled at how quickly their small group was coming together. By the end of the second day, all 3 of the other hybrids had agreed to travel to Marcus's ranch for a meeting. Dr. Chun was the first to arrive, driving through the night from Wyoming in a truck filled with rescued wolves who seemed to sense the importance of their journey. Sarah Chun was a small, quiet woman in her 40s who had dedicated her life to wildlife conservation after discovering her unusual abilities during veterinary school. Like Marcus, she had spent years hiding her true nature, using her work with animals as a cover for the deep connection she felt with all living creatures. I always wondered if there were others like me, she said quietly as she shook hands with Marcus and Elena. The loneliness of keeping such a secret, it's been overwhelming sometimes. Jake Morrison arrived the next morning, a boisterous man in his 30s who had channeled his alien heritage into a successful career as a horse trainer. Unlike Marcus and Sarah, Jake had never fully understood what made him different, only that horses seemed to trust him instinctively, and that he could sometimes sense their thoughts and feelings. I figured I was just gifted, Jake said with a grin that reminded Elena strongly of Marcus's rare smiles. Never occurred to me that my gift might be literally out of this world. Dr. Maria Santos was the last to arrive, but her journey had been the most dramatic. She brought with her video footage of the unexplained lights that had been appearing over Colorado, along with reports from her patients' owners about animals refusing to go outside at night and domestic pets becoming suddenly protective of their families. Whatever's coming, Maria said grimly, the animals know it's a threat. Every dog in my practice has been on high alert for the past week. As the 4 hybrids gathered in Marcus's living room, Elena found herself in the unique position of being the only fully human member of their group. Yet rather than feeling excluded, she felt honored to be trusted with their secrets and included in their plans. The hybrids discovered that their abilities complemented each other in unexpected ways. Marcus's connection was strongest with horses and other large mammals. Sarah could communicate with predators and wild animals. Jake had an intuitive understanding of animal psychology that allowed him to calm even the most aggressive creatures. Maria possessed a healing touch that worked on both animals and humans. Together, they began to understand that their combined abilities might indeed offer advantages that pure equinarians would not possess. They could potentially rally Earth's animal population as allies in the coming conflict, something that had never been possible in previous battles against the Devourers. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Marcus led the group to the coordinates his father had given him, a remote meadow in the mountains where the likelihood of unwanted human observation was minimal. Elena accompanied them, carrying medical supplies and communication equipment in case they were needed. They arrived at the meadow just as the sun was setting on the third day, and almost immediately, the air above them began to shimmer with the same quality Elena had seen in the communication crystal. But this time, instead of a small hologram, an entire spacecraft began to materialize in the sky above them. The ship was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. It appeared to be grown rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with life. As it settled gently onto the meadow grass, Elena could see that it was actually a living creature of some kind, bred or evolved to serve as an interstellar vessel. A section of a ship's hull dilated like an iris, and figures began to emerge. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she got her first look at pure equinarians. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of their horse-like ancestry, and their skin held the same iridescent quality she had seen in Zephyr's holographic image. The figure leading the group was unmistakably Marcus's father, and Elena watched his father and son embrace for the first time in 15 years. Despite the gravity of the situation, she found herself smiling at the obvious joy of their reunion. "You have done well, my son," Zephyr said, looking around at the assembled hybrids. "Better than I dared hope." But his expression grew serious as he turned to address the entire group. "I must tell you that the situation is worse than we originally believed. The Devourers have not only found Earth, but they have learned of the hybrid population. They see your kind as a particular threat to their plans, and they will target you specifically in their initial assault." Elena felt a chill of fear, not for herself, but for Marcus and the others who had already faced a lifetime of hiding and isolation, only to discover that their very existence made them targets for an enemy they had never known existed. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. Zephyr smiled, and Elena could see where Marcus had inherited his rare but brilliant smile. "We fight, my son, but not in the way the Devourers expect. We use every advantage we have, including the one thing they have never encountered before, the power of two worlds united as one." As Elena looked around at the group of extraordinary beings who had become her family over the past few days, she realized that the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since learning about the approaching threat, she felt hope. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Devourers had never faced before: the combined strength of Earth and Equinara, forged through love and tempered by the courage of those who refused to let either world fall to darkness. The war for two worlds was about to begin, and Elena Rodriguez, small-town veterinarian, was about to play a crucial role in determining its outcome.